Racial tensions, violence, corruption. South Africa has a long list of problems. Most of the time, an aging infrastructure and power cuts are not mentioned. But for almost 15 years, the lights go periodically out in the country. Let's talk about South Africa, a country which faces numerous challenges. Some of them, like the water and energy shortage, are so fundamental that we have to ask, does this country still have a future? Let's get an overview. And welcome to Dark New World. When we look at our infrastructure, we tend to think we built it once and it solves our problems. South Africa is proof how wrong that assessment is. For decades, the lack of investments in infrastructure and maintenance has led to multiple crises that could bring the country to its knees. First, we look into the power shortages that are intensifying, before we analyze the water situation. Climate change, in combination with overpopulation, has created a complex environment with its own set of problems that cannot be countered by the struggling economy of the African nation. And in the end, I will talk about the social consequences that could set the country on fire. Because South Africa is a lot, beautiful, diverse, but certainly not socially stable. After months of rolling power cuts, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared a state of national disaster. South Africa's state-owned power company, Eskom, which produces 90% of the country's electricity, is beleaguered with old and poorly maintained coal-fired power plants, prone to breakdowns. It's also around 24 billion euros in debt. As demand outpaces supply, there have been scheduled blackouts, known as load shedding, for up to 12 hours a day, impacting the lives and livelihoods of 60 million South Africans. The nation is still largely dependent on fossil fuels, with only 7% of its energy coming from renewables in 2020, according to the International Energy Agency. But the shortages are no surprise. This crisis was in the making for almost 15 years. Mismanagement and corruption is playing a large role. Eskom has become a totem of the large-scale corruption that marked the tenure of the previous president, Jacob Zuma, between 2009 and 2018. Attempting to get things back on track, a new management team is striving to adhere to a strict maintenance schedule that keeps the system under pressure by permanently reducing production capacity. In this context, each breakdown that is added to these maintenance interventions puts a little more strain on the situation. The only way to avoid overloading the system in the face of these blackouts is to relieve the grid of some of its load by depriving certain geographical areas of electricity. South Africans have been confronted with such power cuts since 2007 and have grown used to the chronic shortage. Since the beginning of the year, the country has experienced more than 100 days of power outages at all levels, but rarely has the situation been so critical. Only twice, in June 2022 and December 2019, has Eskom had to resort to the level of load shedding currently being implemented. Now experts warn that the system could be driven to a state in which total collapse of the power grid is highly likely. The war in Ukraine made the situation worse because high oil prices increased the costs for energy and maintenance again. While we tend to think that the war is only causing damage in Europe, these overlooked aspects make the Ukraine war a potential trigger for a gigantic amount of crises all over the planet. The problem with aging infrastructure is that South Africa is not capable to ease the situation in any way. There is simply not enough money to overhaul the power grid of the entire nation. So the solutions that will be proposed will only include yet another set of plans to increase maintenance. But rather sooner than later, the system will break down. The old infrastructure will fail. And if this is the only crisis South Africans would face, I think it wouldn't be a problem to solve it. But energy is a concern of today. Tomorrow, water will be the problem. Both the failing water infrastructure and the ever-increasing population have exacerbated the water crisis in South Africa, forcing its residents to adopt strict habits. Official mandates regarding significant reductions in water usage have led to overcrowded communal water taps, dangerous boreholing, and a desperate acceptance of contaminated groundwater sources, all to combat a drought that has plagued South African locale for over 7 years. While local crisis response groups are available to support residents, there is only so much that can be done to solve the water crisis in South Africa, when there is simply no sources of clean, fresh water available. South Africa is considered a water-scarce country, and one of the driest countries in the world. The country is located within what is considered a drought belt, and is the 5th most water-scarce country in sub-Saharan Africa. Approximately 50% of the country's water supplies are used by the extensive industrial agriculture sector. The topography varies from desert to semi-desert in the drier northwestern region to subhumid and wet along the country's eastern coast. Approximately half of the country is classified as arid or semi-arid. South Africa has both subtropical and temperate climate conditions, which are influenced by the ocean along the east and west coasts as well as the interior plateaus. Water is a very unevenly distributed resource, meaning that millions of South Africans already drink water that was captured in reservoirs in excess of 400 kilometers away. The country and its government tried to solve this water insecurity problem by engineering dams and importing water through inter-basin transfer schemes. This means that the looming water emergency should be considered a key issue, as without water, a large section of South African society would be at risk. This lack of access to clean water across South Africa will result in many difficulties, including issues with health, education, gender equity, and economic development. The water risk is also likely to result in a number of socio-political events that could well destabilize the local, provincial, or national government. Such events could include civil unrest and instability. Water stress can spark civil unrest over water availability and quality or government water management practices. Water stress can lead to emergence of a black market for water. In Zimbabwe and Kenya, a black market for water has emerged in part due to government failure to extend water infrastructure into poor areas. These water black markets are unregulated, leaving vendors open to selling contaminated water and increasing the cost of water at their will. When mechanisms for resolving water conflicts at the local level break down, disputes over water can turn violent. Prominent examples of localized conflicts are those between herding communities clashing violently with local farming communities over land. Localized violence has the potential to escalate internationally if water resources are shared across state borders. Combined with the apartheid history of the country and rampant racism, minor disruptions could lead to escalation. Like 2 years ago, following the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma on the 7th of July 2021. Mobs rampaged through shopping malls and industrial parks throughout South Africa's two most populous provinces, KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, looting nearly 1,000 shops and warehouses as an overwhelmed police force largely stood by. The riots also ravaged large parts of the port city of Durban, forcing the country's largest refinery on the city's outskirts to shut down temporarily, while roads to its harbor, Sub-Saharan Africa's biggest, also closed, disrupting fuel and food deliveries as well as key exports. Consequently, the ever-worsening crime, weak economic growth and collapsing infrastructure will drive up the costs of living and doing business in South Africa. For the country's high net worth and skilled individuals, this will prove intolerable. In fact, signs already suggest that immigration of the country's most productive members has jumped in recent years, and data suggests most will never return. This will rob South Africa of its best and brightest, likely disproportionately hurting key sectors of the future like high-tech, science, medicine. It will also mean ever greater budgetary shortfalls as the richest and the most mobile of South African society departs for sunnier and safer shores. For a country that started with such promise following the end of the apartheid in 1994, South Africa finds itself in a sorry mess. But as political infighting and Eskom woes continue, the chances of South Africa halting its rot will become ever more difficult in the years ahead. If you want to see more nation-based videos, let me know it in the comments. In this video, I talk about the war in Ukraine and ask the question if we're still able to stop a world war. And on the right, I talk about the fallout of the earthquakes in Turkey. My name is Dennis, thank you for watching and goodbye.